special Faith Journal Forum where we're taping on location with Dr. Subramanian Swamy, who's an expert in economy. Also, he's a member of the Janata Party. He's the president of the Janata Party in India, former cabinet member in India, and also the author of the book Hindus Under Siege. We're going to have a discussion about Hinduism in India, relations with China, and other wide-ranging issues related to the great subcontinent. Welcome, Dr. Swamy.
Thank you very much.
My first question for you relates to the subject that we tend to see the most here in the West, and that is the matter of the caste system, the reverberations of the caste system in India. Could you describe for me where we stand with relation to the caste system?
Well, the caste system was originally not designed as a mutually antagonistic groupings. It was not even connected with birth. It's one of the retrogressions that caste has been connected to birth. The sages in their discussion on why the caste system should be created had said that there were four sources of power in a society: knowledge, wealth, weapons, and land. And this should be not in any one hand. In fact, not more than one should be in the hands of one person. Mm-hmm. So therefore, if you were pursued knowledge, and you are a seller of knowledge or you are a teacher of knowledge, then you shouldn't have any wealth, you shouldn't have any weapons, you shouldn't have any land. And the society should give you donations so that you could live. And that's how our preachers and our sannyasis, our religious preceptors, etc., they lived in society, taught people, but their donations came from the public. If you were owner of the weapons, then you were the king, but you couldn't make policy. For policy, you had to go with people in knowledge. And same thing with wealth and land. So now, this connection has to break. Now, what you're asking a question is, what about today?
Yes.
Today, it is melting. The caste divisions are melting. There are intercaste marriages. But the most significant development that has taken place in the last 3 months is the fact that the two mutually antagonistic castes which grew over the centuries was the so-called untouchable caste or scheduled castes and the Brahmins. They coalesced together in a political party and gave that party a majority in the biggest, most populous state of the country, the Uttar Pradesh state. And an ex-untouchable caste lady became the chief minister or the equivalent of a governor.
I recall this, but you know, the thing that's interesting is the caste system appears to be embedded in spite of legislation. You cannot legislate people's emotions. You cannot legislate the way people think. Do you really believe the caste system is going?
It is melting, yes. The only place where people feel very strongly about castes are two. One, when it comes to elections, and two, when it comes to marriages. In other places, you can see here and there bigoted people acting on the basis of caste. But I think in the urban centers, there's hardly any. In the rural areas, we now find teachers who don't belong to the Brahmin caste. There are others from other castes. They're getting appointed by central legislation. And naturally, therefore, the melting process is going on. How fast it will go towards the end, I can't say. But it's quite clear that caste has become irrelevant.
You know, you've written this book, Hindus Under Siege, and we tend in the West to think of the caste system as being endemic to Hindu religion. Explain that first, please.
Well, first of all, our religious scriptures are divided into two parts. One which is revealed knowledge, which you can't amend, and the Vedas come in that. Then there is something called ordained by priests, which is called Shruti, Smriti literature, which can be amended from time to time.
Commentary.
It's not commentary, it's codes. You know, when a girl should get married, what should be the boy's responsibility, what the parents' responsibility. All these codes are part of the Smritis, and the Smriti can be amended, and much of all this business of castes is in the Smriti. So therefore there is no religious sanction that caste should remain. It just happens to be convenient. Certainly convenient for politicians, because then you don't have to say, I built you a road and I built you a dam or I brought you electric power. You say, I'm your caste man. If I get defeated, then somebody else's caste man will become the representative.
So a different form of social stratification.
Yeah.
But one of the things we've followed on this particular TV program over the years is news of people converting to Buddhism or Christianity, rather large-scale conversions. Why does that take place? We understood that was to escape the strictures of a caste system.
I don't agree that the conversions are large scale. Even today, the Buddhist population has not crossed 1%. I think, first of all, if anybody converts to Buddhism, a Hindu will not feel upset because of the fact that Buddha was a great son of the Hindu. He was the incarnation of Vishnu, and all that he preached was a reform of Hinduism, which most of us accept today. That's not a problem. The problem arises out of the fact that there are still people who think that Hinduism should be practiced in a certain obscurantist way, and that creates a problem. The second thing is that Buddhists, if you convert to Buddhism, then the privileges that the scheduled castes get as Hindus will be also extended to them.
Yes.
So therefore they don't lose anything. At the same time, they can say we are not part of the Hindu social stratification.
But some states have actually enacted legislation that prevents conversion. Why?
They don't. There's no state which has enacted legislation which prevents conversion. But there are legislations, and surprisingly, in Congress ruled states began the process, and the latest one is also a Congress party ruled state of Himachal Pradesh, which is to prevent induced conversion.
Okay,
where money is involved or caution is involved, and but if an individual converts, even under the act, there is no bar.
But it's okay to reconvert back to Hinduism.
There is no. If somebody says my ancestors are Hindus and I want to reconvert, you don't need any priest's permission. You just say I'm a Hindu, and the Hindus don't have a conversion ceremony.
Okay. So are people converting to escape the stricture of the caste system?
Yes, that the original motivation that led to conversion was partly that. Partly also there was 800 years of Islamic rule and 200 years of British rule, which was Christian. And both these definitely made it a disadvantage to be a Hindu. And the weakest link in that was those who were the most poor. And the most poor therefore converted. But then conversion took place across all castes. Even today I meet many Muslims who say that my great-grandfather was a Brahmin from this place or that place. One of the most famous editors of our newspapers called M.J. Akbar, he has written a book called Blood Brothers, where he says that my grandfather was a Kshatriya, that is the warrior class.
Okay, after the break I want to continue this discussion. Please stay with us, we'll be back soon. After the break, I want to continue this discussion. Please stay with us. We'll be back soon.
And try to convert people, then have these quotas, how many churches they built, how many people they converted, and go back and collect some more. So I think that also the target of conversion is the Hindu, is not any other religion. They convert Hindus only, and to some extent the Pope also gave that direction when he came to India in 1999, that India is a country which Christians regard as a legitimate base for conversions. And of course one can't blame him for that, because Christianity does believe in proselytization, whereas we Hindus don't believe in it. So that's the second dimension, the religious dimension. There's also the dimension of the state being not neutral between religions. Because the Muslims and the Christians vote as en bloc, they tend to pander to them more and target the Hindu community to see that they don't get organized. For example, the Temples Act specifically empowers the government only to take over the administration of Hindu temples, but you cannot take over the administration of the mosques or Muslim mosques or the Christian churches. This discrimination is there. Religious travelers for Muslims and Christians are subsidized abroad, whereas Hindus are not. So then there is a...
So why is this occurring? I have to. Why is this occurring?
The only reason this is occurring is that the Nehru family has traditionally regarded consolidation of Hindus as antithetical to them. They think that they would rule better with a coalition of minorities.
And when you say Nehru family, it's the people we call the Gandhis. Not Mohandas Gandhi, but people who took the name.
It's a coincidence in name. Yeah. Nehru and then Indira Gandhi and then their Gandhis, other Gandhis. Yeah. These people have always regarded their source of power as a coalition of minorities, and these minorities vote 100% as a bloc. Whereas if the Hindus consolidate, they would have a problem.
Now there has been, from what I perceive, a sort of back to Hinduism movement in India in the last, I guess, 25, 30 years in particular. What's driving that?
Well, partly the feeling of that we Hindus in our own country, which has been traditionally a Hindu country, there was a time when it was 100% Hindu country, are second-class citizens.
How's that? How so?
Well, this you see on temples, the government can take it over any time, take over all the funds of the temples, not spend it on the temples, but spend it on other activities of the government. Sometimes the state chief ministers have arrested the Shankaracharya, one of the pontiffs of Hindu religion, on false cases, harassment. One state in India called Andhra, they tried in fact to take over the property of the thing and hand it over to the Christian churches.
Well, I want to come back to the Christian issue first of all and ask you, so what's the problem with Christians attempting to convert people?
There's no problem with Christians per se. In fact, I myself went to a Christian missionary school. We are great deep regard and respect for the education. We are a country which has always accepted all religions. The Jewish people were persecuted in vast parts of the world, but in India we didn't persecute them. And what we do feel is that this new crop of entrepreneurial Christians who come there with their jumbo jets and plane, and then hold galas, and then try to claim that they are converting people, offer people scholarships to study in the West, jobs, employment, so on. It's a kind of induced conversion, and we think that's bad.
Well, I think some of them have felt, I'm going to speak for them in a second,
Yeah,
they felt that the strictures of the caste system have left a wide segment of the population thirsting for some form of liberty, which they feel they may get if they become Christian. How do you respond to that?
I would respond favorably to that in the sense that it's the responsibility of the Hindus, not only to ban it by acts of the legislation, but also to ensure that you are not vulnerable. I mean, if you are like a wildebeest in Africa and you roam in the open fields, you are bound to be attacked by lions. The same way, if you have weaknesses in your background, then people will take advantage of it. And they certainly, even if they don't take advantage, they may think that they are doing God's duty by liberating them. I have no quarrel with that. I think that we should. At the same time, it is not only the caste factor. It's not the liberation factor, because if it was so, then even today 99% of the scheduled caste of the ex-untouchables are still Hindus. They have not converted. It's the inducement that your career advancement would take place if you go out. For example, I'll give you today our Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Mr. Balakrishnan. He's a Hindu. He's from the ex-untouchable caste, and his father converted to Christianity and then reconverted to Hinduism later. So they asked him after his son became the Chief Justice that, well, why did you do that? And he said, well, I wanted a good education and I couldn't afford it, but I didn't want to leave Hindu religion, so for the sake of meeting the requirements of the Christian schools, I converted, and when my education was over, I reconverted. So I think the caste system injustices are not the main part of the conversion activities. It's the main part is motivated by offer of heaven once you convert.
Salvation. When we come back, what I want to talk about is whether India really is a secular society as it claims. Please stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Please stay with us. We'll be back shortly.
Thought it should have meant, namely that the state will not interfere in religions, except of course to maintain public order, and will be neutral to who will be in government, who will get promoted, who will get admissions on the question of religion. Certain safeguards have to be provided for the minority, because the majority is 83%, and you shouldn't swamp the minorities by majority vote in a democracy. But unfortunately, the way the Gandhis have practiced, Nehru-Gandhi hyphenated, have practiced secularism in India has meant basically the pandering to minority interests. For example, if a Muslim marries more than one wife, he is permitted under the law, because that's what the Shariat allows him. I think he can marry 4 times.
Oh, really? In India?
In India. And if he says simply talaq, talaq, talaq 3 times, the divorce is instantaneous. I mean, this is totally abhorrent to modern civil law. But Hindus are subject to modern civil law. There is a statute passed by Parliament which regulates Hindu marriages, but not Islamic marriages. We say, why should there be 2 laws in the country? Similarly, in the state of Kashmir, Hindus cannot go and settle down in the state of Kashmir and start businesses there and so on, because the Jawaharlal Nehru said that the Muslim proportion should not be reduced by people coming from the rest of India to occupy lands there. So there are a lot of discrimination against the Hindus, and therefore secularism has got to be discredited.
This is interesting, because in a nation that is, well, the homeland for at least 4 faiths, I think Jainism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Sikhism, and is a homeland to the Zoroastrians and other religions, it strikes me as the challenges are immense anyway, because it's a polyglot nation. You're in government, you've been the president of a political party since 1990. What are the challenges that face you?
The only challenge that faces me are 2 extremes. One is, I shouldn't allow the sentiment to snowball into a fascist suppression of minorities.
Okay.
And this happened in Germany when people didn't articulate nationalism properly, and a corporal came and totally distorted the future of Germany. If there is a vacuum, somebody is going to fill it. And there is a vacuum today on an enlightened view of Hinduism. They want an Hindu identity, they want an Indian identity which is in synchronization with Hindu identity. Those urges are there, somebody has to do it.
Racial politics.
It's not racial, there's nothing racial about India. The DNA science research has now shown that we're all the same people.
Right.
We didn't come from anywhere abroad, we are all indigenous to India. But this is the one extreme. The other extreme is that without a well-defined Indian identity, we will not be able to progress as a nation, because we've got 130 million Muslims who are being told that they are transnational. They are not, they are Muslims first and Indians second. Now we've got to tell them something by which we don't hurt their feelings.
Who's telling them this?
Oh, Osama bin Laden is telling them, the Al-Qaeda is telling them. And they are making inroads. Because there's nothing else to challenge that concept.
Yeah.
And we have to do that, and we have to define an Indian identity where Muslim has to place Indian interests above even their religious interests.
Now, as I understand it, there's a system of reservations or quotas for hiring and placement in certain positions, applying for school, etc. Is that working?
Well, as far as reservations is concerned, the part that's not working is the proposal to reserve quotas, provide quotas for Muslims and Christians. And to some extent, other castes besides the ex-untouchables. As far as the ex-untouchables is concerned, there's unanimity that these people have suffered imposed disabilities. These disabilities that they have today are not something they have acquired by lack of concern for education, whatever. It's been imposed on them by the rest of society. So we have to compensate for that, and that there's no debate on that.
Okay.
The debate arises whether we should give it to other castes also, and Christians and Muslims, merely because they are poor. Because the poverty becomes a concept, then it should be also applied for higher castes of India, who are also equally poor. For instance, the Brahmins are supposed to be caste-wise itself poor. The Brahmins are amongst the poorest people in India today, even though they still enjoy high social status. Now, there's no reservation for them. So I think what is being argued is that for a successful reservation or affirmative action program, those other castes who have not suffered any imposed disabilities, you provide them scholarships, you provide them good education, you have improve your education system so that everybody can compete.
So this form of social engineering, such as you have it now, has it worked?
It has it will not work. It has worked in the sense for the scheduled caste, it has made a lot of difference. A lot of people have come in high places. We have had a president who's from the ex-untouchable caste. We have now Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who's from the ex-untouchable caste. Now the Chief Minister is not only a scheduled caste, but she's also a woman in the state of Uttar Pradesh. So we have scheduled caste climbing up the social ladders all along the way. And that's happening, maybe not fast enough, but certainly happening about as fast as the system can bear. Mm-hmm. But where it is not working is the attempt to give reservations to these non-imposed disabilities.
So, for example, I could be a person as a Brahmin, and my family could, for 2 or 3 generations, have been disadvantaged economically,
yeah.
And the deck is stacked against me.
Yes, it is stacked against you because you can't afford a good school, and you can't therefore compete in competitive exams for the IITs and the IIMs. Mm-hmm. So the question is, the Brahmin says, what have I done? I mean, that I should be discriminated. Why the Muslims and Christians have ruled the country for 1,000 years together, sequentially, and they are to get reservations, but not me. So that's where the tension is arising.
Thank you, Dr. Swami. Faith Journal continues after this break. Swami, Faith Journal continues after this break. Welcome, Dr. Swami. The question I have is, on the 60th anniversary of independence, India's independence, the nation is emerging economically. What impact is that having on faith and culture in the nation overall?
Well, it's having 2 different types of effects. One is a positive one is a negative one. And I don't know how it's all going to work out because globalization is moving at breakneck speed. The positive side is that suddenly the rich Indians, well-to-do Indians are feeling the need for how to manage stress, and they are increasingly turning to spiritual leaders in India, and the spiritual leaders are getting enormous audiences, very large. I mean, we politicians feel jealous of the turnout, with people coming. Not only in the politics, we have to bring people, we have to arrange for their accommodation, the travel and so on. Here, people not only come on their own, but they also pay for listening to these spiritual leaders, yoga teachers. So there's been a tremendous growth of temples, temple revenues, and so on. And as the prosperity has increased, the possibility of a renaissance in Hinduism, thanks to these broad-minded spiritual teachers who have spawned across the country. They've also come abroad, some of them, and set up places here. But the negative factor is there were certain glorified institutions which are under threat. For instance, the family. The family has been a great shock absorber for the community. We have no social security system in place even today, and the unemployed or the handicapped and so on were always accommodated within the family. And the net result is that this family is being disrupted into nuclear families. We have 4 families to 5 families living together in a big place, now being converted into nuclear families. And so naturally this is one aspect. The second is the taste revolution that is taking place in terms of food, in terms of clothing and so on. That is making people concerned that whether we are losing our roots, we are forgetting our past. And the desire to learn Indian languages and so on is going down because English is such a premium, and we have so much access to learning English. So these are some negative aspects. But I think if I go by historical trends of India, the way of thinking of a Hindu is so ingrained. I think in the end the compromise will be worked out. We'll have a modern Hindu who will not have the past obscurantist practices and prejudices and superstitions, and at the same time committed to Hindu institutions. And I think globalization may help, because we see this abroad too, that rich Indians are playing a major role in ensuring that good textbooks are written on Hinduism and so on in modern language.
You see, the challenge with globalization is how do you maintain your own culture in the face of this huge, I guess, mostly Western, mostly American culture. The Japanese seem to have done a fairly good job at it. How is India going to withstand this wave, so to speak?
Well, I think the Japanese haven't done a good job. I think they're still too narrow-minded. They're unable to accept foreigners. They have a huge demographic problem, and I think
maybe I should have qualified good job to say they've actually put the fortress walls up, is what I should have said.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Right. I think Indians that way have a much more open approach, and we can absorb. We have absorbed in the past. We can absorb, and I don't think that I find, for example, 10 years ago, if there was an Indian marriage, a Hindu marriage, the bridegroom would be dressed in Western clothes, which is tie clothes, and now that's gone. There was 10 years ago, children were calling their mothers and fathers mummy and daddy. That's gone. Wearing traditional Indian clothes has now become a thing to do on social occasions. Not in the workplace, but certainly in social occasions.
So there's a dual process going on. There's globalization, but at the same time, and you'll have to explain this to me, why are cities like Bombay being renamed Mumbai and Madras has become Chennai, etc.? What's going on here?
Well, in the case of Bombay becoming Mumbai, it's understandable because in the local language, it was always called Mumbai. And so why should you use it by the anglicized name Bombay? But in the case of Chennai, of course, I think it's stupidity, because Chennai was never the old name for the city of Madras, and that's why the Madras High Court has said we'll continue to be known as Madras High Court. We will not change.
So what was that about?
That was the party in power had a phobia about. If they were to go back to the old name, the non-British name then it would have been called Mylapore or something else, which would have had connotations with Hinduism. And the present dispensation in power is anti-religious.
I'm fascinated by your comment earlier about how people of means are now returning to faith.
Yes.
How does that? What are you seeing? How's that demonstrated?
Well, it's happening here too. For instance, I saw in Business Week, which is an American magazine for businessmen, that for stress control, they find the teaching of Bhagavad Gita will help. For instance, the idea that you have freedom in this world, you have freedom as a human being only to do action, but the fruit of that action, how it will come, in what form it will come, is not in your hands. That's in the hand, as God says, in my hands. I might give you a lousy job and a wonderful wife, or a lousy wife and a wonderful job. You're not going to have everything. So this kind of mental outlook reduces stress. So I think the philosophy of Hinduism is extremely scientific and appealing. And our people find yoga, for instance, as a way of removing many of the ailments that we have. Our foods, for example, now the Americans are telling us that Alzheimer has such a low incidence in India because of the turmeric that you use in your curry. Right. And that's why your Indians are lucky. So, there's a reaffirmation of the faith in fact, through globalization, you find more foreigners coming to India and going to our religious institutions.
True, the exchange is going the other way. Ayurvedic medicine, for example.
Yeah, that's right, Ayurvedic medicine. So many of the things, and now people are acknowledging that it is we who gave the world decimal and zero and algebra and even rocketry. So it's new sense. So pride is also coming with the knowledge of with this globalization.
After the break, I want to talk some more about that. Please stay with us. We'll be back shortly. After the break, I want to talk some more about that. Please stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Dr. Swami, you're talking to a number of temples and organizations here in Canada. The state of Hinduism outside of India, does it compare with the state of Hinduism inside of India?
In some ways, it's doing better than the state of Hinduism in India, because here we have modern minds who have come together, and now the literature that they are producing, the reinterpretation, the interpretation of our scriptures and so on, they're bringing out in glossy books. They're doing extremely well in that sense. But the globalization question that you raised earlier impacts Indians much more in the West, because you go through schools here for Indian children, then they come out talking like Americans and behaving like Americans, and that is something which suddenly the Indian families find very difficult to cope with. The dating system here, or the marriages, or the sanctity of marriages, and the way the parents count for their old age, etc. These things are some things which the Indians extremely unhappy. So they are therefore hoping that we will have religious institutions and become a part of the social life of the Hindus in this country, so that they can retain some of the good points of our religion, at the same time participate in the society here. So I think Hinduism here is flourishing, and I think the fact that there's a lot of effort being made to build magnificent temples here,
Yes.
Is having tremendous, profound impact in India. People are proud of the structures that have come up here. Of course, we are extremely also happy that the West is tolerant for this, and it's shown a great deal. We can't build, for example, temples in Middle East. You can't even celebrate.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, in Saudi Arabia, you can't even celebrate your festivals. Even if you do it inside your house and they discover it, you pay heavy punishment. So I think this is one angle. The second is, many of the Indians came as indentured labor to West Indies, to South Africa, and so on. And they were so unhappy that the only way they could retain their sanity was to have this hold, this fanatical attachment to the religion. So in fact, in some ways, I find the Guyanese and the Trinidadians and the South Africans much more have much more fervor about Hinduism than I do, for example. And I'm impressed by their dedication. In fact, in Trinidad, in Guyana, I think, the British wouldn't allow them to build a temple on the main island.
Yes.
And they pointed out to a small island some kilometer away in the ocean and said, go and build it there. And then that too, when you're off work, you can do it, take leave and do it.
Yeah.
So people held stones in their mouth and swam across, and bit by bit they built it, and it's a monument of dedication. I'm really impressed with that.
The manner of worship here in North America, I imagine, is quite different. I mean, than it would be, let's say, in India.
No, they import.
We Sundays, for example, I think of that.
No, temples people go every day here, whenever they can. There's no hard and fast rule when you have to go. There's no mass, for example, like the Christians have, that you have to be on the Sunday. Hindus, there's no. It's a much more decentralized approach. You can choose the God you want to pray to, and you can choose the time of day you want to. But if you do want to become a spiritually evolved person, then the discipline gets stricter. But if you want to be a religious person, there's no hard and fast.
Now, you talked about the fact that in India there was a renewed interest in the fundamentals, the essence of the religion.
Yes.
Over here, is that the same, or are we still seeing weddings with cakes and white weddings and bridesmaids?
Yeah, here they are a little defensive on being innovative on how to evaluate and interpret religious concepts. So they're a little more conservative in that sense than in terms of practices than back home. Back home we can experiment, and we can even have religious ceremonies through the television, which will be intolerable here.
Oh, really? Well, television is a wonderful medium.
Yeah.
I have to ask you, when you mention back home, we often hear stories of communal violence. I can't let you go away without asking about this. That particular places like Gujarat, the Ayodhya Ram Temple, Babri Mosque.
Yeah.
Is this going to continue, or do you think this is come and gone?
No, it's going to continue, because the basic flaw in our social engineering
Explain.
is being that since 1947 we haven't defined what is the Indian identity? What are we? For a long time, the Nehru family tried to propagate that we were a nation of warring states and the British put us together. So they may have done other damage, but this is a great legacy. That's not correct. That doesn't solve problems. It actually makes it worse, in the sense then it means that you can, if you came together, you can fall asunder too. And the net result is that today there are 130 million Muslims who are being appealed to by terrorist forces, saying that your nationality is secondary, your religion is primary, and you have a job to convert the whole of India into Islam. So this is one aspect which troubles the Muslim, and we have at the same time there are growths in there are Hindu groups who are saying that Muslims are foreigners. They got Pakistan. What the hell are they doing here? So we have to find a way by which the Muslim feels an equal partner in the nation building of the country. The Christian, the equal partner in the nation building of the country. Yes. Christians, we have much less problem. The problem is only with foreign missionaries. We don't have any other problem with the Christians.
So Kerala, the traditional Christians,
we have just no problem. I mean, we go to Christian schools, we have just no problems. I myself went to a Christian school, as I said before. The question, therefore, is this, and I have proposed in my book that we should regard India as an ancient nation of Hindus plus those others whose ancestors are Hindus, so that Muslims and Christians can claim equal right to the legacy of India as Hindus can. And privately Muslims accept that, and Christians of course easily accept that, and because it is a fact that 99.9% of the Christians and Muslims in India are people who converted at some point in history. And they didn't come from somewhere else.
So they're all Vedic people, so to speak.
They are all indigenous people. So they have as much claim to the past of India as we do. And the only problem is that these hardcore mullahs who are in madrasas, they are making it difficult, and they are have been encouraged.
That's crept into the Indian Muslim community now too, then, are you saying?
They are not. They put them on the defensive. They...
Because I identify this with other nations, but India, typically the Muslim community has been fairly tranquil.
But we have recent reports of the London bomb, Glasgow thing, where some Indians have participated with the Al-Qaeda, so we can't be complacent about it. The only way we can prevent and retain the Muslim independence from Al-Qaeda and others is to give them a sense of belonging within the country. Because if you don't, there will be other groups who will say, you're not really a fully Indian, you're a Muslim after all. And then look what Osama bin Laden is saying, that for all Muslims, Hindus are enemies. Jews and Hindus are enemies. This is be openly propagating that. So you have to have a counter for that. That's where I feel that this communal question gets out of hand. In Gujarat, what happened is 56 women and children were burnt alive in a railway bogie, and this let loose in anger, and I think the government perhaps may have been slow in responding. Some accuse them of being deliberately slow, but there's no evidence of that. I think I have been a minister, I have controlled some riots. If you move quickly, and if the police is itself infected, you move the army, and you can control it.
Well, after the break, I want to talk to you about one of your strengths, that is the relations with China, discussion of Pakistan, and the future of India.
Sure.
Please stay with us. We'll be back. Sure.
Sure.
Please stay with us. We'll be back. Dr. Swami, we have two giants. We have India and we have China bordering on each other. I know you've written 4 books about China. What is the future of relations between India and China?
Well, it's a bit hard to predict, but first, if you go back in history, we have had 2,000 years at least of relations, and only I think 3 years we were really tense. All the time there were peaceful exchanges. They accepted Buddhism from us, and we are family-wise, culture-wise quite similar. So there's no historical background like in the case of France and Germany, or England and France and so on. There's no history of war between the two countries. The essential problem is that we are sitting at the underbelly of China, namely Tibet. and they have another problem on the other side, that is Taiwan. So if the Indians and the United States, if India and the United States get together, this will make China very nervous. That's one aspect which we have to overcome. That is to assure China that we will not, in the event of their problems with the United States over Taiwan, we won't tickle them on their belly. This is I don't know how we can create that kind of trust. China on its side is been patronizing Pakistan. In fact, Pakistan's nuclear program is entirely due to the assistance from China and North Korea, and otherwise Pakistan would never have been able to do it. Besides, of course, the usual robbery and theft which was done in Europe by Pakistani scientists. Mm-hmm. So the promotion of Pakistan by China is also an irritant that we have. But most of all, China's economic success is on thin ice. That is, their entire success is based on the fact that they're able to export such a large amount to the West. Those exports are not Chinese made. They are maybe made in China. But they are semi-processed products. 2/3 of it are semi-processed products from East Asia, which go to China for cheaper labor and get
so assembled in China
and assembled, little value added, and then sent out. So tomorrow, if East Asia were to say India is a better place, then that traffic would go via India. Previously, it was going directly. But because labor costs have risen in East Asia, they've started going through China.
When you say East Asia, you're talking
about Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong.
This is something we don't often hear, but you're an economist. You have that perspective.
It's in one of my books.
Okay.
Books.
So
if that gets diverted, China will collapse because China has a surplus only on its European and American account.
Yes.
Its account on East Asia, its account of indigenously produced Chinese goods is all negative. Yeah. And therefore India represents a potential threat to undermining China. And especially because the Western countries have tremendous influence in these East Asian countries. If India and the United States got together, maybe the East Asians might feel Indian democracy, property rights, and the patents and the intellectual property rights all more favorable. Mm-hmm. If India improves its infrastructure, this trade would definitely get diverted via India.
Can we expect a continuing rapprochement with Pakistan?
Well, if there is a Pakistan.
Why do you say if there is? That's interesting.
Well, see, the Pakistan failed to develop an identity except in terms of anti-Indian terms. What is Pakistan identity? Even today,
language?
No. There are different languages. There are Sindhi and Pashtuni and Baluchi and they, many of them didn't want to be part of Pakistan. For instance, Balochistan never wanted to be part of Pakistan. They were forced to be. And India and Pakistan, there was an equation. And suddenly the world has forgotten that equation and started equating India with China. And India has made this tremendous progress in IT. And yes. It has democracy. I mean, the one thing that Pakistanis, when they speak to me, say they admire about India is that despite all, you have democracy.
World's largest democracy.
And we have been functioning as the world's largest democracy. And they admire that, they grudge it, but it's there. And it's having an impact in Pakistan. And I don't think Pakistan society is designed institutionally for a democracy.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think the next 100 years holds for India? What will it look like in 100 years, or 20 years for that matter?
I can draw on the 7-part series of the Time magazine, which says that both India and China were developed countries 200 years ago, and they just resumed their position. I think India, China, United States will be the triangle which will decide the future of the world in the coming years. India has already overtaken Japan in its GDP measured by purchasing power parity. China is number 2, and I'm sure that we will overtake China too, because China has a financial system problem which they haven't been able to correct and cannot correct because of political reasons. And so I think these 3 countries will be the dominant countries of the 21st century.
So will India manage to maintain its Hindu identity with all this?
Yes, of course, because the Hindu identity is getting deeper because the philosophical aspects which are now being propagated is not support the caste system, support the bondage of women. None of that. This now the idiom is totally modern. You go to any preaching in India, in any part where there are 100,000 people sitting to hear, it is basically how you can overcome the problems of life. And people across all castes sit together. There's no scheduled caste that sit in one corner and the Brahmins have to sit in another.
On that wonderful note, Dr. Swami, I'd like to say thank you very much. A most fascinating interview. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.